The searing Nevada sun beat down on Abigail Bennett as she stumbled through the desert, her cracked lips bleeding and her vision blurring. The promised land of California seemed like a cruel joke now, with the wagon train long gone and her husband buried beneath a crude wooden cross 2 days behind her. At 24, she had never imagined she would be a widow, lost in the unforgiving wilderness of the American frontier in 1871. Her wedding ring caught the sunlight as she used her hand to shield her eyes, scanning the horizon for any sign of civilization. The water in her canteen had run dry hours ago, and the food had been gone since yesterday. The desert stretched endlessly before her, a sea of sand and scrub brush that seemed determined to claim her as it had claimed so many others. "Just a little farther," she whispered to herself, her voice raspy from thirst. "Just a little." Abigail's foot caught on a rock, sending her sprawling into the dust. Pain shot through her ankle as she tried to stand, causing her to collapse back to the ground with a cry. Tears carved clean tracks down her dirt-streaked face as she realized the terrible truth. She was going to die here, alone and forgotten. As her consciousness began to fade, she thought she heard the pounding of hooves, a hallucination, surely the desert's final cruelty. But then a shadow fell across her face, blotting out the merciless sun. Through her haze, she saw the silhouette of a man on horseback. "Madam, can you hear me?" The voice sounded distant, as if coming from the end of a long tunnel. Abigail tried to respond, but no sound emerged from her parched throat. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was being lifted by strong arms that smelled of leather and sage. When Abigail awoke, she was lying on a bed softer than anything she'd felt in months. A cool cloth rested on her forehead, and the air around her was mercifully cool. For a moment, she wondered if she had died and gone to heaven, but the pain in her ankle assured her she was very much alive. "You're awake." The voice came from across the room, deep and rich, with a slight drawl. Abigail turned her head to see a man sitting in a chair by the window, his features thrown into shadow by the sunlight streaming in behind him. As he stood and approached the bed, she could make out his appearance, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His dark hair, streaked with premature silver at the temples, was in need of a trim, and his jaw bore several days' worth of stubble. "Where am I?" she managed, her voice still rough. "Griffin Ranch." He poured water from a pitcher on the nightstand and helped her sit up to drink it. "About 15 miles north of Silver Creek. I'm Matthew Griffin. Found you half dead in the desert while I was checking fence lines." Abigail drank greedily, the cool water like nectar on her parched tongue. "Abigail Bennett," she replied once she had drained the glass. "Thank you for saving my life, Mr. Griffin." A flicker of something pain perhaps crossed his face before he nodded curtly. "Doc Reynolds says you'll be fine with rest, dehydration, exhaustion, and a sprained ankle. Nothing time won't heal." He took the empty glass from her hand, careful not to let their fingers touch. "I'll have Mrs. Ramirez bring you something to eat." Before Abigail could say another word, Matthew Griffin had disappeared through the door, leaving her alone with her thoughts and questions. Who was this solemn cowboy who had saved her from certain death, and why did she feel as though she had glimpsed a deep well of sorrow behind those striking blue eyes? Later that afternoon, a plump Mexican woman entered the room carrying a tray laden with food. "I am Elena Ramirez," she said with a warm smile that immediately put Abigail at ease. "I cook and keep house for Senor Griffin." She placed the tray on Abigail's lap, a bowl of fragrant stew, freshly baked bread, and a cup of coffee. "This looks wonderful," Abigail said sincerely, her stomach growling in anticipation. "Thank you, Mrs. Ramirez." Elena waved away her thanks. "You eat. You need strength." She busied herself tidying the already immaculate room. "The Senor, he does not bring visitors often. In fact, never. You are the first since—" She stopped abruptly, crossing herself. "Since what?" Abigail couldn't help asking. Elena shook her head. "It is not my place to tell the Senor's business. But this house, it has been too quiet for too long." She patted Abigail's hand. "You rest. Tomorrow, perhaps, you will feel strong enough to come downstairs." Over the next few days, Abigail gradually regained her strength. She learned from Elena that Griffin Ranch was one of the largest cattle operations in the territory, spanning thousands of acres and employing a dozen cowboys. Matthew Griffin had inherited it from his father 5 years earlier and had earned a reputation as a fair but reserved employer. What Elena didn't tell her, though, Abigail pieced it together from overheard conversations in the unused rooms in the sprawling ranch house, was that Matthew had once had a family. There were spaces on the walls where pictures had been removed, and a room at the end of the hall that remained firmly closed. On her 4th day at the ranch, Abigail ventured downstairs for the first time, leaning heavily on the cane that Dr. Reynolds had left for her. The house was larger than she had imagined, built of solid timber and stone with a grandness that suggested prosperity tempered by practicality. She found Matthew in what appeared to be a study, poring over ledgers at a massive oak desk. He stood immediately when she entered, closing the book in front of him. "Miss Bennett, you're up." "Mrs. Bennett," she corrected gently, "though I suppose I'm a widow now." The word felt strange on her tongue, a status she hadn't yet fully accepted. A flash of understanding crossed Matthew's face. "My apologies. Please sit." He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk. Abigail lowered herself carefully into the chair, arranging her borrowed dress, one of Elena's, altered to fit her slimmer frame around her. "I wanted to thank you properly for your hospitality, Mr. Griffin, and to ask about the possibility of transportation to the nearest town. I cannot impose on your kindness indefinitely." Matthew studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Where will you go?" The question caught her off guard. Where indeed? Her husband's brother in California had been their destination, but she had no money for passage west. Her family back east had disowned her when she married Thomas against their wishes. She had no skills beyond those of a gentlewoman's education, music, embroidery, literature hardly useful on the frontier. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'll find something. I'm not afraid of hard work." Matthew nodded thoughtfully. "Silver Creek's a small town, not much opportunity for a woman alone." He seemed to be weighing something in his mind. "Mrs. Ramirez could use help around the house, and I've been meaning to hire a teacher for the ranch children. The Hands kids, I mean. They've got no schooling to speak of." Hope fluttered in Abigail's chest. "I taught briefly in Boston before I was married. I would be more than willing to earn my keep that way." "It wouldn't be much," Matthew warned. "Room and board plus a small salary, and it would be temporary just until you decide where to go next." "That would be more than generous," Abigail said sincerely, relief washing over her. A roof over her head, food in her stomach, and honest work, it was more than she had dared hope for when she lay dying in the desert. Matthew stood, signaling that the conversation was over. "Good. You can start once Dr. Reynolds says you're fully recovered." He paused, seeming uncomfortable. "Mrs. Ramirez will show you around when you're ready. The ranch hands' quarters are off limits to you, understand? And you'll take your meals in the kitchen." Abigail recognized the boundaries he was establishing and nodded her agreement. "Of course. Thank you, Mr. Griffin." As she made her way back to her room, leaning on her cane, Abigail wondered about the man who had saved her life. Matthew Griffin was clearly haunted by something or someone that had left him wary of connections. Yet, beneath his gruff exterior, she had glimpsed a decency that intrigued her. Little did she know that as she contemplated her mysterious benefactor, Matthew stood at his study window watching her slow progress across the courtyard, wrestling with his own questions about the unexpected visitor who had disrupted the carefully constructed solitude of Griffin Ranch. 2 weeks passed, and Abigail settled into a routine at the ranch. Her ankle healed enough for her to discard the cane, though she still favored it slightly when tired. True to his word, Matthew had set up a small schoolroom in a converted storeroom near the main house, where Abigail taught 8 children ranging in age from 6 to 14. The work was challenging but rewarding, and she found herself looking forward to the children's eager faces each morning. She saw little of Matthew during this time. He left before dawn each day to work the ranch and often returned after she had retired for the night. The few times they encountered each other were brief, polite exchanges that revealed little of the man behind the courteous facade. One evening, unable to sleep, Abigail wandered to the kitchen for a cup of tea. She was surprised to find Matthew sitting at the table, a glass of whiskey in front of him, staring at an old photograph. He looked up sharply at her entrance, quickly tucking the photo into his shirt pocket. "Mrs. Bennett, you're up late." "As are you," she replied, moving to the stove where the kettle still simmered. "Would you like some tea instead of that whiskey?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Are you suggesting I've had enough?" "I wouldn't presume to judge," Abigail said, pouring hot water into a cup, "but tea might help you sleep better than spirits." Matthew considered this, then pushed his glass aside. "Why not? It's been a long time since anyone fussed over me." Abigail prepared a second cup and brought them both to the table, sitting across from him. They drank in companionable silence for a few minutes before Matthew spoke. "How are the lessons going?" "Well, I think. The children are eager to learn, though their education has been spotty at best. Tommy Hendricks can barely read, but his mathematical ability is remarkable. And little Maria Ramirez has a gift for storytelling that I've rarely seen in a child so young." Matthew nodded. "Elena says Maria wants to be just like you. Keeps trying to talk all fancy now." Abigail laughed softly. "I'm hardly a sophisticated model, but if I can instill a love of learning in these children, I'll consider my time here well spent." "You're good with them," Matthew observed. "Patient, kind." He seemed to be seeing her properly for the first time, his gaze thoughtful. "Were you and your husband planning on having children of your own?" The question stirred a familiar ache in Abigail's heart. "Yes. Thomas and I both wanted a large family. We talked about having at least 4 children. She looked down at her tea. "Life had other plans, I suppose." "Life often does," Matthew said, his voice low and rough with an emotion Abigail couldn't quite place. He stood abruptly. "I should turn in. Dawn comes early." "Mr. Griffin," Abigail called as he reached the doorway. He paused but didn't turn around. "Thank you. Not just for saving my life, but for giving me purpose here. It means more than I can express." His shoulders tensed, then relaxed slightly. "Good night, Mrs. Bennett," he said quietly, and disappeared into the darkness of the hallway. The next day, Abigail was surprised when one of the ranch hands delivered a crate of books to the schoolroom. Inside, she found primers, readers, a geography text, and even a volume of Shakespeare's works well used but in good condition. "Where did these come from?" she asked the young cowboy. He shrugged. "Boss told me to bring them here, said you might find them useful." That evening at supper, which she now took at the main table with Matthew and Elna rather than in the kitchen, Abigail thanked him for the books. "They were gathering dust in the attic," he said dismissively. "Better they be put to use educating the next generation." Elena exchanged a knowing glance with Abigail. They both recognized that the books had been carefully selected and dusted, not simply pulled from storage. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures to the desert, Abigail found herself increasingly drawn to the enigmatic rancher. There was a depth to Matthew Griffin that belied his taciturn exterior, a kindness that manifested in unexpected ways like the books for her students, or the way he had quietly arranged for Dr. Reynolds to bring her a proper dress from town, or how he always made sure she had fresh flowers in the schoolroom. One Saturday afternoon, Abigail was hanging laundry in the courtyard when she heard the unmistakable sounds of an argument coming from the barn. Curious, she moved closer, recognizing Matthew's voice raised in anger. "I told you before, Jenkins, I won't sell. Not to Blackwell, not to anyone. This ranch stays in the Griffin family." "Be reasonable, Griffin," a second voice urged. "Blackwell's offering top dollar, more than this spread is worth, and with just you here, no family to pass it on to." "Well, it's just good business sense." "My family situation is none of your concern," Matthew snapped. "Now get off my land before I have my men escort you out." There was silence, then the sound of boots on straw. "You'll regret this, Griffin. Blackwell doesn't take rejection well, and this drought isn't going to break any time soon. How long can you hold out when your cattle start dying of thirst?" Abigail backed away quickly, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping, but her mind was racing. She hadn't realized the ranch was facing difficulties, though now that she thought about it, she had noticed Matthew spending more and more time with his ledgers, his face increasingly drawn with worry. That evening, after Elena had retired for the night, Abigail found Matthew on the porch, smoking a cigarette and staring out at the star-filled sky. "May I join you?" she asked softly. He nodded, offering her the rocking chair while he remained standing, leaning against a post. "Beautiful night," she observed, looking up at the vast expanse of stars. In Boston, the city lights obscured all but the brightest stars. I never knew the sky could hold so many. Matthew followed her gaze upward. "My father used to say that the stars were windows to heaven, so our loved ones could look down and watch over us." "That's a lovely thought." Abigail hesitated, then decided to be direct. "Mr. Griffin, Matthew, I couldn't help overhearing part of your conversation in the barn today." His expression hardened immediately. "That was private business, Mrs. Bennett." "I know, and I apologize for intruding. But if the ranch is in trouble, perhaps I could help." Matthew gave a short, bitter laugh. "Unless you're hiding a substantial fortune under those skirts, I doubt it." "I meant with the accounts," Abigail clarified, ignoring his crudeness. "Before I was married, I helped my father with the books for his import business. I have some experience with financial matters." Matthew studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "Why would you want to help me? You'll be moving on once you've saved enough money." Abigail met his gaze steadily. "Because you helped me when I had nothing to offer in return, and because—" She hesitated, then plunged ahead. "Because I care what happens to this place, to the people here." "To you," she almost added, but held her tongue. Matthew sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We're facing the worst drought in 20 years. Water holes are drying up, grazing land turning to dust. I've had to sell off a quarter of my herd already, at prices so low it was practically giving them away." He flicked his cigarette into the darkness. "Richard Blackwell owns most of the valley already. He wants Griffin Ranch to complete his empire. And you don't want to sell. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather came here with nothing but a dream and built something that lasted. My father expanded it, made it prosper. And now—" He trailed off, his voice tight with emotion. "Now I'm watching it all slip away." Abigail rose and moved to stand beside him at the railing. "What about digging more wells, or damming the creek to create a reservoir?" Matthew looked at her in surprise. "You know about ranching?" "No," she admitted with a small smile. "But I know about problem solving, and I'm a quick study." For the first time since she had met him, Matthew Griffin laughed a rich, warm sound that transformed his face and made him look years younger. "I believe you are at that, Mrs. Bennett." "Abigail," she corrected gently. "I think we've moved beyond formalities, don't you?" Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them, a recognition, a possibility. Then Matthew cleared his throat and stepped back slightly. "I should turn in. Early start tomorrow." He paused at the door. "If you're serious about helping with the accounts, I could use a fresh pair of eyes." "I am," Abigail affirmed. "Just tell me when." He nodded once. "Tomorrow after supper." Then he was gone, leaving Abigail alone with the stars and the whisper of possibility in the cool night air. True to his word, Matthew invited Abigail to his study the following evening. The massive oak desk was covered with ledgers, correspondence, and maps of the ranch property. For the next several hours, they worked side by side, Abigail quickly grasping the ranch's financial situation. "You've been undercharging for your beef," she noted, comparing his prices with market reports from newspapers Matthew had collected. "And these supply costs seem excessive. Have you considered ordering in bulk with other ranchers to negotiate better terms?" Matthew watched her work with undisguised admiration. You really do have a head for figures. My father believed daughters should be educated as thoroughly as sons, Abigail explained, much to my mother's dismay. Your parents sound like interesting people, Abigail smiled sadly. They were, both gone now. My father died shortly after I married Thomas, and my mother followed 6 months later. I think she simply lost the will to live without him. Matthew's expression softened. They must have loved each other very much. They did. Theirs was a love match, rare in Boston society where marriages are typically business arrangements. She looked up from the ledger. What about your parents? Similar story. My mother was the daughter of a wealthy merchant from San Francisco. She came to visit relatives in Silver Creek and met my father at a harvest dance. According to family legend, he took one look at her and told his best friend, "That's the woman I'm going to marry." How romantic, Abigail said, charmed by the story. And did she feel the same? Not at first, Matthew chuckled. She thought he was too rough around the edges, but my father was nothing if not persistent. Rode 30 miles every Sunday just to attend church in town where he knew she'd be. Eventually wore down her resistance. They raised you here on the ranch? Matthew nodded, his eyes distant with memory. Best childhood a boy could ask for. Freedom to roam, horses to ride, a creek to swim in. His expression darkened slightly. My mother died when I was 15. Pneumonia. My father never remarried, said there could never be another woman like her. Abigail sensed there was more to Matthew's story, much more, but she didn't press. Instead, she returned her attention to the ledgers, making notes and calculations until her eyes grew heavy with fatigue. It's late, Matthew said, noticing her stifled yawn. We should continue this tomorrow. As they gathered the papers, their hands brushed briefly. Abigail felt a jolt of awareness travel up her arm, and when she looked up, she found Matthew watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might say something, or perhaps even reach for her, but then he stepped back, breaking the spell. "Thank you for your help today," he said formally. "Good night, Abigail." "Good night, Matthew," she replied, wondering if he could hear the slight tremor in her voice. As the weeks passed, their evening work sessions became a regular occurrence. Together they devised a plan to see the ranch through the drought, renegotiating supply contracts, adjusting cattle prices, and identifying areas where expenses could be trimmed without compromising the operation. Matthew even implemented Abigail's suggestion to create a small reservoir by damming part of the creek, a project that quickly proved its worth as water became increasingly scarce. With each passing day, the barriers between them lowered a little more. Matthew began joining Abigail and the children for the occasional lesson, sometimes sharing stories of the region's history or demonstrating practical skills like map reading or weather prediction. The children adored these visits, and Abigail found herself watching the transformation that came over Matthew when he was with them, how his face softened, how freely he laughed. One crisp October afternoon, Abigail dismissed the children early and decided to walk to a rocky outcropping that overlooked the ranch. The climb was steeper than she'd anticipated, and she was slightly winded by the time she reached the top. But the view was worth it. Miles of Griffin land spread out before her, the ranch buildings nestled in the valley below, cattle grazing on the distant plains. Quite a sight, isn't it? Abigail turned to find Matthew approaching on horseback. He dismounted and tied his horse to a scrub oak before joining her at the edge of the outcropping. "It's beautiful," she agreed. "I can see why your family fought so hard to keep it." Matthew nodded, his gaze sweeping across his domain. "This was my thinking spot as a boy. Whenever I needed to sort something out, I'd come up here." "And what are you sorting out today?" Abigail asked, sensing that his appearance was no accident. Matthew was quiet for a long moment. Jenkins came by again. Blackwell's raised his offer, substantially. Abigail's heart sank. "Are you considering it?" "I should be," he admitted. "It would solve all my financial problems in one stroke. I could start fresh somewhere else." "But this is your home." Matthew turned to look at her, his blue eyes troubled. A home should have a family in it, children's laughter, a woman's touch. He gestured toward the sprawling ranch house in the distance. That place has been empty of those things for too long. Abigail sensed they were approaching dangerous territory, the untold part of Matthew's story that hung between them like a shadow. What happened, Matthew? What emptied your home of laughter? For a moment, she thought he might refuse to answer, might retreat behind the wall he had carefully constructed around his heart. But then he sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping as if under a great weight. I was married once, he said quietly. Her name was Sarah. We had a daughter, Emily. Abigail's heart constricted at the raw pain in his voice. What happened to them? Cholera, 5 years ago. Matthew's voice was flat, as if the only way he could tell the story was to distance himself from the emotion of it. I was away driving cattle to market. By the time I got back, they were both gone, buried on the hill behind the orchard. Oh, Matthew, Abigail breathed, instinctively reaching for his hand. To her surprise, he didn't pull away. I'm so sorry. I should have been here, he continued, his grip tightening on her hand. Maybe I could have gotten the doctor faster, or taken them to town where the medicine was better. You can't know that, Abigail said gently. Sometimes there's nothing anyone can do. That's what everyone said, but it didn't stop me from blaming myself. Still doesn't. He released her hand and turned away, looking out over his land. After they died, I thought about selling, about walking away from everything. But this place, it was Sarah's home too. She loved it here. And Emily's first steps were in that garden. Their memories are in every corner. Abigail moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. So you stayed. I stayed, but I stopped living. He looked down at her, his eyes filled with a complex mix of emotions. Until you stumbled into my life. Abigail's breath caught at the naked honesty in his face. Matthew, you brought something back to this place, Abigail. Something I thought was gone forever. He reached out hesitantly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I hear the children laughing in the schoolroom. I smell fresh bread in the kitchen. For the first time in years, this feels like a home again. The tenderness in his touch made Abigail's heart race. I found a home here too, she admitted. I wasn't looking for one, but somehow... Stay, Matthew said, the word half question, half plea. Not as a teacher or an accountant. Stay as... He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. As what, Matthew? Abigail prompted softly, though she thought she knew the answer, hoped she knew. Instead of speaking, Matthew bent his head and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, almost tentative, as if he half expected her to pull away. But Abigail rose on her tiptoes, her hands coming up to rest lightly on his chest as she returned the kiss with a sweetness that made his heart ache. When they finally broke apart, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "Well, I never thought I'd feel this way again," he whispered. "Never wanted to. Loving someone means risking loss." "Yes," Abigail agreed, "but not loving means guaranteeing it." Matthew drew back to look at her, a smile slowly spreading across his face. A real smile that reached his eyes and erased years of sorrow. "When did you get so wise, Abigail Bennett?" "Somewhere between Boston and your doorstep," she replied with a smile of her own. "It was a rather educational journey." Matthew laughed, the sound carrying across the valley, free and unrestrained. Then he sobered, taking both her hands in his. "I'm not asking for an answer now. This is sudden, and you've been through your own loss. But I want you to know that there's a place for you here with me if you want it." Abigail squeezed his hands. "I think I've known that since the first time I saw this ranch through clear eyes, not the haze of dehydration." "Is that a yes?" Matthew asked, hope lighting his face. "It's a ask me properly when the time is right," Abigail teased. "I may be practical, but I'm still a woman who appreciates romance." Matthew grinned. "I'll keep that in mind." He offered her his arm. "Shall we head back? Elena will be wondering where we've disappeared to." As they descended the hill together, Abigail felt lighter than she had in months. The future, which had seemed so bleak and uncertain when she lay dying in the desert, now stretched before her full of promise and possibility. And beside her walked a man who, against all odds, had found room in his wounded heart to love again. Little did either of them suspect that the peace they had found would soon be threatened, or that their newfound happiness would be tested in ways they couldn't imagine. The following day, Matthew rode to Silver Creek to speak with his banker about refinancing the ranch's loans. Abigail spent the morning teaching as usual, but her mind kept wandering to the memory of Matthew's kiss and the promise it held. The children noticed her distraction and exchanged knowing glances. The romance between their teacher and the ranch owner had not gone unobserved by even the youngest among them. After dismissing the class, Abigail was tidying the schoolroom when Elena burst in, her normally cheerful face drawn with worry. "Señora, come quickly. Riders coming, many men, and they do not look friendly." Abigail hurried outside to see a cloud of dust approaching the ranch from the east, at least a dozen horsemen riding hard. She squinted against the sun, trying to make out who they might be. "Where is Matthew?" she asked, anxiety tightening her chest. "Still in town, not expected back until evening." Elena wrung her hands. "Pedro has gone to fetch the men from the north pasture, but they are far." Abigail scanned the ranch yard. Only 3 hands remained: young Miguel, old Jose who cooked for the Cowboys, and lame Tom who handled the blacksmithing. The women and children had all gone tense, gathering together near the main house. "Get everyone inside," Abigail instructed Elena. "Lock the doors and stay away from the windows." "What about you, Señora?" "I'll handle this," Abigail said with more confidence than she felt. As the others retreated to the safety of the house, Abigail moved to stand on the front porch, drawing herself up to her full height. She may have been a city woman not long ago, but she was no stranger to confrontation. Her father had taught her never to show fear, especially when she was most afraid. The riders thundered into the yard, their horses lathered from the hard ride. At their head was a heavy-set man with a florid face and expensive clothes that marked him as no ordinary cowhand. He dismounted with surprising grace for his bulk and approached the porch, removing his hat in an exaggerated gesture of courtesy. "Madam," he greeted, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. "Richard Blackwell, at your service. I was hoping to speak with Matthew Griffin." So this was Blackwell, the man attempting to buy out the ranch. Abigail kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Griffin is away on business. I'm Mrs. Bennett, the school teacher. Perhaps I can help you." Blackwell's eyes narrowed slightly. "School teacher, eh? Funny, I didn't know Griffin had enough children on this place to warrant a teacher." He looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "But then, maybe teaching isn't your only function here." One of his men snickered, and Abigail felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but anger. "Mr. Blackwell, whatever business you have with Mr. Griffin will have to wait for his return. I must ask you and your men to leave now." Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. Blackwell's smile faded. "I'm afraid my business is rather urgent. You see, I've come to collect on a debt." "What debt?" Abigail demanded, though she suspected this was merely a pretext. "Griffin's been drawing water from Silver Creek. That water belongs to me. I own the water rights for the entire Eastern Valley." Abigail fought to keep her expression neutral. "That's impossible. Griffin Ranch has riparian rights to Silver Creek dating back to the original land grant." Blackwell looked surprised at her knowledge, perhaps once, but the territorial court recently ruled in my favor. Griffin's been stealing my water my cattle desperately need in this drought. He nodded to his men. "We've come to ensure he stops." Several of the riders dismounted and began moving toward the small dam that had been built at Abigail's suggestion, the dam that was keeping the ranch's cattle alive during the drought. "Stop!" Abigail descended the porch steps, planting herself in their path. "You have no right to destroy property on this ranch. If there's a legal dispute, it should be settled in court, not by force." Blackwell laughed. "Court takes time, madam. My cattle are dying of thirst now." As are Mr. Griffin's, Abigail countered. Surely there's enough water to share until a fair settlement can be reached. I don't share what's mine, Blackwell said coldly. Now step aside. Abigail held her ground. No. One of Blackwell's men moved toward her, but just then the crack of a rifle shot split the air. Everyone froze, turning toward the sound. Matthew sat astride his horse at the edge of the yard, rifle raised to his shoulder. Behind him were Pedro and a half-dozen Griffin ranch hands, all armed. "Get off my land, Blackwell," Matthew called, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. Relief flooded through Abigail as Matthew rode forward, positioning his horse between her and Blackwell's men. The ranch hands spread out, outnumbered but determined. Blackwell's face darkened with anger. "You're in violation of a court order, Griffin. That water belongs to me." "That's a lie, and you know it," Matthew replied evenly. "I've seen no court order, and even if such a ruling exists, it would grant you a share of the water, not exclusive rights. You've been trying to drive me out for years. This is just your latest tactic." The tension in the air was palpable as the two groups faced off. Abigail held her breath, aware that one wrong move could spark violence that would leave people dead on both sides. Blackwell seemed to reach the same conclusion. After a tense moment, he smiled thinly. "You're right about one thing, Griffin. I've been trying to acquire your ranch. It's the final piece I need." He put his hat back on. "But there are other ways to get what I want. Ways that don't involve bloodshed today, at least." "Make your threats elsewhere," Matthew said coldly. "You're not welcome here." Blackwell mounted his horse. "Think about my offer, Griffin. It still stands for now." "But prices have a way of falling when a ranch can't water its cattle." He tipped his hat mockingly at Abigail. "Madam, a pleasure." With that, he wheeled his horse around and rode out, his men following reluctantly, casting dark looks over their shoulders. As soon as they were gone, Matthew dismounted and strode to Abigail, his face tight with worry. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "I'm fine," she assured him. "But how did you know to come back?" "Jenkins warned me. Saw Blackwell gathering men and guessed his intentions." Matthew's hands were gentle as they cupped her face. "When I realized he was coming here, with you and the others unprotected." "We managed," Abigail said, though her knees felt suddenly weak as the danger they had faced became clear. "The women and children are safe in the house." Matthew pulled her into a fierce embrace. "I've never been so scared," he murmured into her hair. "The thought of losing you." Abigail clung to him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "You didn't. I'm right here." After ensuring everyone was safe, Matthew called a meeting of all the ranch hands. In the large kitchen, with maps spread across the table, they discussed their options. "Blackwell wasn't bluffing about the court order," Jenkins confirmed grimly. "He's been buying judges as easily as he buys land. Got a ruling yesterday giving him primary rights to Silver Creek water." "We can appeal," Matthew said, "but that takes time we don't have. The reservoir will last another 2 weeks at most. After that, we'll start losing cattle." "We could drive them north to the mountains," Pedro suggested. "There's water there." "That's Paiute territory," an older hand named Davis objected. "They'd see it as trespassing." "Not if we ask permission," Matthew said thoughtfully. "Chief Winnemucca and my father had an understanding. Respect on both sides. I might be able to negotiate grazing rights." Abigail, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "What about proving Blackwell obtained the ruling fraudulently? If he bribed a judge, that's a federal offense." All eyes turned to her, and she felt a moment of self-consciousness before continuing. "My father once faced a similar situation with a corrupt harbor master. He gathered evidence of the bribes and took it to the federal marshal." Matthew considered this. "It's worth trying. But we'd need proof." "The territorial circuit judge is due in Silver Creek next week," Jenkins offered. "He's a straight arrow, from what I hear, not in Blackwell's pocket." "Then we have a week to find evidence," Matthew decided. "In the meantime, we'll prepare to move the herd if necessary." He looked around the table. "Double the guards tonight. I wouldn't put it past Blackwell to try something under cover of darkness." As the meeting broke up, Matthew drew Abigail aside. "You were brave today," he said quietly. "Standing up to Blackwell like that, but also foolish. Those men are dangerous." "What would you have had me do? Let them destroy the dam while you were away?" Abigail challenged. "This ranch is as much my home now as anyone's. I'll defend it as I see fit." Matthew's expression softened. "That's the second time you've called it home." "Because it is," Abigail said simply. "But it won't be anyone's home if Blackwell gets his way." Matthew nodded grimly. "He won't. I promise you that." The next few days were tense as the ranch prepared for potential trouble. The cattle were moved closer to the house where they could be more easily guarded. Men took turns standing watch, rifles ready. Matthew rode to neighboring ranches, seeking support against Blackwell's power grab. Abigail continued teaching, not wanting to frighten the children, but she also took on new responsibilities, helping Elena preserve food for the winter, learning to shoot a rifle under Matthew's patient instruction, and combing through old ranch documents looking for anything that might strengthen their claim to the water rights. It was in a dusty trunk in the attic that she found a faded letter from the territorial governor to Matthew's grandfather, explicitly granting the Griffin family perpetual rights to Silver Creek water as compensation for allowing a military road to be built across their property. The document was dated 1835 and bore the official territorial seal. "Matthew!" Abigail called excitedly, hurrying down the stairs with the precious paper. "Look what I found." Matthew examined the letter, his face lighting up with hope. "This could be exactly what we need. The governor's grant would supersede any recent court ruling." He looked at Abigail with wonder. "How did you know to look in that old trunk?" "I didn't," she admitted. "I was actually looking for your grandmother's recipes." Elena mentioned she had a special way of preserving peaches that kept them fresh through winter. Matthew laughed, a full, rich sound that filled the room. "So you saved the ranch while searching for a peach recipe? Abigail Bennett, you are a marvel." Before she could respond, he bent and kissed her, not the gentle, tentative kiss of their first embrace, but a passionate one, born of joy and relief, and something deeper that neither of them had yet put into words. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Matthew kept his arms around her. "Marry me," he said softly. Abigail blinked in surprise. "What?" "Marry me," Matthew repeated, his blue eyes intense. "I know it's sudden. I know we've known each other only a short time. But I love you, Abigail. I think I've loved you since I found you in the desert, though I was too stubborn and scared to admit it." Abigail's heart felt too full for her chest. "Matthew, are you certain? After everything that happened with Sarah?" "Sarah would want me to be happy," he said firmly. "To love again. To fill this house with laughter and life. And that's what you've brought back to me, Abigail, the ability to look forward instead of back." He took her hands in his. "I'm not asking you to replace what I lost. I'm asking you to help me build something new." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Matthew Griffin." His answering smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He lifted her off her feet and spun her around, both of them laughing with pure joy. Their celebration was interrupted by the sound of horses in the yard. Matthew set Abigail down gently. "Stay here," he instructed, his expression turning serious again as he went to see who had arrived. Abigail followed anyway, clutching the precious document. To her relief, it wasn't Blackwell or his men, but Jenkins returning from town with news. "Circuit judge arrived early," he reported, "and he's already hearing cases. If you want to present your case, it should be now before Blackwell realizes what we're up to." Matthew nodded decisively. "Saddle fresh horses. We ride for town immediately." He turned to Abigail. "Will you come? That letter was your find. You should be there to present it." Pride swelled in Abigail's heart at his confidence in her. Of course. The ride to Silver Creek took just over an hour at a hard pace. The small town was bustling with activity. Circuit court days always drew crowds from the surrounding ranches and homesteads. The courthouse, a modest wooden building that doubled as the town hall, was packed with spectators when Matthew, Abigail, and Jenkins arrived. They slipped in quietly, taking seats at the back as the judge, a stern-looking man with iron-gray hair and piercing eyes, dispensed frontier justice with efficient fairness. When there was a lull between cases, Matthew approached the bench. "Your Honor, I have an urgent matter regarding water rights that requires the court's attention." The judge peered at him over wire-rimmed spectacles. "Name?" "Matthew Griffin, Your Honor, Griffin Ranch." The judge's eyebrows rose slightly in recognition. Griffin, I believe there was a ruling on Silver Creek water rights just recently in territorial court." "Yes, Your Honor, and I'm here to challenge that ruling based on new evidence." Matthew gestured to Abigail, who stepped forward with the letter. As she handed the document to the judge, she felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her, including the cold stare of Richard Blackwell, who had entered the courtroom unnoticed and now sat watching from the corner, his face thunderous. The judge examined the letter carefully, then looked up at Matthew. "This appears to be a direct grant from the territorial governor predating any other claims to Silver Creek. Why wasn't this presented in the original hearing?" "It was believed lost, Your Honor," Matthew explained. "The document was only discovered yesterday during a search of family archives." The judge turned his gaze to Blackwell. "Mr. Blackwell, you claimed exclusive rights to Silver Creek based on purchases of adjacent properties. Did you know of this prior grant to the Griffin family?" Blackwell rose, his face a mask of injured innocence. "Your Honor, I had no knowledge of any such document, and I question its authenticity after all these years. It could easily be a forgery." "The territorial seal appears genuine," the judge observed, "and I recognize Governor Henderson's signature." He thought for a moment. "I'm inclined to rule that this grant takes precedence over recent claims, but I will examine it more thoroughly before making a final determination." Blackwell's face darkened. "Your Honor, my cattle are dying of thirst now. I cannot wait for scholarly examination of ancient documents." "The drought affects all ranchers equally, Mr. Blackwell," the judge replied coolly, "and the law must be followed regardless of inconvenience." He banged his gavel. "I will rule on this matter tomorrow morning. In the meantime, both parties will share equal access to Silver Creek water. Any interference with that sharing will be considered contempt of court." Outside the courthouse, Blackwell intercepted Matthew and Abigail. "Clever move, Griffin," he snarled, "but this isn't over. That judge won't be here forever, and when he leaves, you'll find that friends in high places count for more than dusty papers." "Threaten all you want, Blackwell," Matthew replied evenly. "The law's on my side now." Blackwell's gaze shifted to Abigail, his eyes narrowing. "I underestimated you, Mrs. Bennett. A mistake I won't make again." "Is that a threat, Mr. Blackwell?" Abigail asked calmly. "Consider it a friendly warning. Griffin Ranch has seen its share of tragedies. Would be a shame if there were more." Matthew stepped forward, his hand dropping to his gun. "Say one more word against her, and judge or no judge, I'll—" "Matthew, no." Abigail caught his arm. "He's not worth it." Jenkins appeared at their side, his hand also on his weapon. "Everything all right here?" Blackwell smiled thinly. "Just a friendly conversation between neighbors. Good day to you all." He tipped his hat and strode away, shouldering roughly past Jenkins. "We should stay in town tonight," Matthew decided, watching Blackwell's retreating figure. "I don't trust him not to try something while the judge is still considering his ruling." They secured rooms at the Silver Creek Hotel, one for Abigail and one shared by Matthew and Jenkins. After a quiet dinner in the hotel dining room, where several townspeople stopped by to express support for Griffin Ranch against Blackwell's expansionist plans, Abigail retired to her room, exhausted from the day's events. She had just changed into her nightgown when a soft knock came at her door. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, she opened it to find Matthew standing there, his expression troubled. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. Abigail hesitated. It wasn't proper for an unmarried man to be in her room at night, and the small town would certainly talk. But the concern in Matthew's eyes overrode social conventions. She stepped aside to let him enter, leaving the door slightly ajar as a small concession to propriety. "What's wrong?" she asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. Blackwell's men were seen riding out of town about an hour ago, Matthew said, heading in the direction of the ranch. Alarm shot through Abigail. Elena, the children. Jenkins rode back to warn them, Matthew assured her, and the hands know to be on guard. But I'm worried. He ran a hand through his hair. Maybe we should have waited to challenge Blackwell. If anything happens to the people at the ranch because of this. No, Abigail said firmly, taking his hands in hers. You're doing what's right. Blackwell is the one choosing violence. Never doubt that. Matthew's eyes softened as he looked at her. How did I get so lucky? Finding you in that desert was the best thing that ever happened to me. I believe I'm the lucky one, Abigail replied, her voice husky with emotion. I was dying, Matthew. You gave me life, a home, love. Matthew cupped her face in his hands. I want to marry you as soon as possible. Tomorrow, after the judge's ruling. Tomorrow? Abigail laughed in surprise. There's no time to plan a proper wedding. I don't need proper, I just need you. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Unless you want to wait? Abigail considered for only a moment. Life on the frontier had taught her the value of seizing happiness when it presented itself. Tomorrow it is, she agreed, but I have nothing to wear. You look beautiful in anything, Matthew said sincerely. Then he grinned. But I imagine Mrs. Lawson at the general store could help. She's always boasting about the fine fabrics she orders from San Francisco. Their planning was interrupted by shouts from the street below. Matthew moved to the window, his body tensing as he looked out. Fire, he said grimly. At the courthouse. They rushed downstairs to join the crowd gathering in front of the burning building. The volunteer fire brigade was already at work, forming a bucket line from the town well, but the flames had taken firm hold of the wooden structure. The circuit judge stood watching in dismay, still in his nightshirt and robe. All the court documents, he was saying to the sheriff, the deeds, the records, the evidence in pending cases all going up in smoke. Matthew and Abigail exchanged a knowing glance. This was no accident. Your Honor, Matthew approached the judge. The Griffin Ranch water rights document, where is it? In my room at the hotel, thank God, the judge replied. I was reviewing it before retiring. Relief washed over Matthew's face. Then Blackwell's plan failed. Blackwell? The judge's eyes narrowed. You think he's responsible for this? I can't prove it, Matthew said carefully. But the timing is suspicious, don't you think? A fire that would destroy the evidence against him on the very night before your ruling. The judge looked thoughtfully at the burning courthouse. Indeed. Most suspicious. He turned to the sheriff. I want a full investigation, and I'll be rendering my decision on the water rights matter first thing in the morning publicly in the town square where everyone can hear it. Word of the fire and the upcoming ruling spread quickly through Silver Creek. By morning, nearly the entire town had gathered in the square to witness the judge's decision. Blackwell arrived just before the appointed time, looking confident despite the suspicious glances cast his way. The judge, now dressed in his formal robe salvaged from his hotel room, stood on the steps of the hotel and called for silence. Having reviewed the evidence in the matter of water rights to Silver Creek, he announced, I find that the original grant to the Griffin family takes precedence over all subsequent claims. Griffin Ranch shall retain primary rights to the creek water, with reasonable allocations to be made for neighboring properties during times of drought. A cheer went up from the crowd. Blackwell was not a popular man in Silver Creek, having bought out or forced out several small ranchers over the years. Furthermore, the judge continued, in light of the suspicious fire at the courthouse last night, I am ordering an investigation into possible interference with judicial proceedings. Until that investigation is complete, all property transactions involving Mr. Richard Blackwell are suspended. Blackwell's face turned purple with rage. This is outrageous. You have no authority. I have every authority, the judge cut him off coldly. And if evidence emerges linking you to the fire, Mr. Blackwell, you'll face federal charges. This court is adjourned. As the crowd dispersed, buzzing with excitement over the dramatic turn of events, Matthew turned to Abigail with a smile that lit his entire face. "We won," he said simply. "Yes," she agreed, squeezing his hand. "Now, I believe we have a wedding to arrange." The ceremony took place that afternoon in the small church on the edge of town. Mrs. Lawson had indeed found a suitable dress for Abigail, a simple but elegant gown of ivory silk that had been ordered for the banker's daughter but never claimed. With a few quick alterations, it fit Abigail perfectly. Word of the wedding spread quickly, and to Abigail's surprise, the church was filled with well-wishers, townspeople who had known Matthew all his life, neighboring ranchers who respected him, and even a delegation from the Paiute tribe with whom Matthew's father had maintained good relations. Elena and several of the ranch children had ridden into town with Jenkins, the older woman fussing over Abigail's hair and insisting on lending her a delicate silver comb that had been in her family for generations. "Something borrowed," she explained with a wink. The ceremony itself was brief but deeply moving. As they exchanged vows before God and the community, Abigail felt a sense of rightness, of coming home in a way she had never experienced before. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Matthew kissed her with tender reverence, she knew that the long journey from Boston with all its hardships and heartbreaks had led her exactly where she was meant to be. The celebration continued at the hotel, where the proprietor had hastily arranged a wedding supper. There was music and dancing, laughter, and tears of joy. Matthew scarcely left Abigail's side, his eyes repeatedly seeking hers as if to assure himself that this happiness was real. As evening fell, they prepared to return to the ranch. The threat from Blackwell seemed neutralized for the moment, with the sheriff keeping a close eye on his movements, and Matthew was eager to get back to his land, their land now. Just as they were mounting their horses, a commotion at the end of the street caught their attention. Richard Blackwell, clearly drunk and disheveled, was staggering toward them, a pistol in his hand. "Griffin!" he bellowed. "You think you've won? You think you can humiliate me and get away with it?" The street cleared quickly as people sought shelter from the armed and unstable man. Matthew pushed Abigail behind him, his hand going to his own weapon. "Go home, Blackwell," he called calmly. "You're drunk and making a fool of yourself." "I built something here," Blackwell ranted, waving the gun erratically. "I was going to own this whole valley, and you and that woman, you ruined everything." The sheriff appeared from a side street, his own gun drawn. "Put it down, Blackwell," he ordered. "Don't make this worse than it already is." For a tense moment, it seemed Blackwell might actually fire. His hand steadied, the pistol pointing directly at Matthew. Abigail's heart froze in her chest as she realized she might lose her new husband before their life together had even begun. Then, to everyone's surprise, Blackwell's face crumpled. The gun dropped from his hand and he sank to his knees in the dusty street, sobbing like a child. "It's over," he mumbled. "Everything's over." The sheriff approached cautiously, kicking the pistol away and hauling Blackwell to his feet. "You're going to jail to sober up," he said firmly, "and then you and I are going to have a long talk about courthouse fires." As the sheriff led Blackwell away, Matthew turned to Abigail, his face drawn with concern. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said, though her hands were shaking. "Just ready to go home." Matthew wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Home," he repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." The ride back to Griffin Ranch was peaceful, the desert night cool and clear around them. Stars blanketed the sky, seeming close enough to touch in the crisp autumn air. As they crested the final ridge and the ranch came into view, lanterns glowing warmly in the windows of the main house, Matthew reined in his horse. "I want you to know something," he said, turning in his saddle to face Abigail. "When Sarah and Emily died, I thought my life was over. I went through the motions, kept the ranch running, but I wasn't living, not really." He reached across to take her hand. "You changed that. You brought me back to life." Abigail's eyes shimmered with tears in the moonlight. "And you saved mine, in more ways than one." "We saved each other," Matthew corrected gently. and now we have a future to build, together. The next morning, Abigail woke in Matthew's arms in the master bedroom that had stood empty for so long. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting the room with golden light. She could hear the sounds of the ranch coming to life outside, horses nickering, men calling to each other, the distant lowing of cattle. Matthew was already awake, watching her with a tenderness that made her heart swell. "Good morning, Mrs. Griffin," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Good morning, husband," she replied, still marveling at the word. "What shall we do today?" Matthew's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Well, there are cattle to feed, horses to exercise, accounts to balance, children to teach." "Just an ordinary day, then," Abigail laughed. "Nothing will ever be ordinary again with you here," Matthew said, suddenly serious. "Each day will be extraordinary because you're in it." 6 months later, spring had transformed the desert around Griffin Ranch. The drought had broken over the winter, bringing much-needed rain that turned the brown landscape green with new growth. Silver Creek ran full and strong, its waters nurturing crops and cattle alike. Richard Blackwell was gone, convicted of arson and attempted murder. He had been sentenced to 10 years in territorial prison. His empire had been divided and sold, much of it to smaller ranchers who had previously been driven out by his predatory practices. Griffin Ranch was thriving under its new management. Abigail had proven to be not just a skilled teacher, but a savvy business partner, introducing innovations that increased profits while improving conditions for the workers and their families. A proper schoolhouse had been built, replacing the converted storeroom, and plans were underway for a small community church. But the greatest change was in the main house itself. No longer silent and tomb-like, it rang with laughter and conversation. Elena hummed as she cooked elaborate meals for the expanded household. Children from the ranch families were frequent visitors, drawn by Abigail's warmth and Matthew's newfound willingness to tell stories of his adventures as a young cowboy. And on a perfect spring morning, as the sun rose over the eastern mountains, Abigail gave birth to a daughter, a strong, healthy girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. They named her Hope for what she represented to them both, a new beginning, a promise of future joy. As Matthew held his tiny daughter for the first time, tears streaming unashamedly down his face, he looked at his exhausted but radiant wife with wonder. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he whispered. "When I lost Sarah and Emily, I believed that part of my life was over forever." Abigail reached up to touch his cheek. "They'll always be a part of you, Matthew. A part of us. We'll make sure Hope knows about her sister, about the people who came before." Matthew nodded, emotion too thick in his throat for words. He had taken Abigail to the small family cemetery on the hill behind the orchard, where Sarah and Emily rested beneath simple stone markers. Together, they had cleared away the weeds that had been allowed to grow, planted flowers, and made it a place of peace rather than pain. "I think they would approve," he said finally. "Sarah always said life was for living, not for hiding away. She would have liked you, I think." "I hope so," Abigail said softly. "I would have liked to know her." Baby Hope stirred in her father's arms, making small mewling sounds that heralded hunger. Matthew carefully returned her to Abigail, watching with amazement as his daughter instinctively sought nourishment at her mother's breast. "She's perfect," he murmured, sitting on the edge of the bed and wrapping an arm around his wife and child. "Just like her mother." "Hardly perfect," Abigail laughed, "but I do my best." "Your best is extraordinary," Matthew insisted. "Look at all you've accomplished since you arrived here. The school, the improvements to the ranch, the way you've brought this community together, and now this most miraculous creation of all." He stroked Hope's downy head with one gentle finger. Abigail leaned against him, contentment washing through her. "We did it together. All of it." From her window, she could see the desert stretching away toward the horizon. No longer a barren wasteland, but a land of promise and possibility. The journey that had begun in tragedy, the death of her first husband, The desperate struggle through the desert had led her to this moment of perfect happiness. "I love you, Matthew Griffin," she said, turning her face up to his, "with all my heart." "And I love you, Abigail Griffin," he replied, kissing her tenderly, "forever and always." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, bathing the ranch in golden light, the small family remained together in the quiet room, a man who had learned to love again, a woman who had found her true home, and the child who represented their shared future in this wild, beautiful land. Outside, Griffin Ranch came fully awake. Cowboys rode out to tend the cattle. Children gathered at the schoolhouse where a substitute teacher awaited them. Elena prepared a special celebration dinner to welcome the newest member of the household. Life continued its eternal cycle of renewal and growth. And in the heart of it all was a love story that had begun with a woman left alone in the desert and a cowboy whose ranch had needed laughter again, a love that had brought healing to them both and promised to sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead in the ever-changing, ever-challenging American West.